My name is Melanie Smith-Guillaume, and I am one of the organizers of this lunch with the League. Most of you are League members, and you know that the League is nonpartisan, so we don't support parties or candidates, but we do support issues that we have, support or oppose issues that we have studied and come to consensus on. I have a couple of announcements this noon. The League annual meeting will be coming up on June 6th, and you have to register for that by May 30th. It's going to be at Papavino's. I also wanted to show you that the new Citizens Guide is out. Maybe you've seen it already. This is an annual publication by the League of Women Voters that gives you information on all the representative government in our area, and you can get it online or at various public venues where we distribute them. Before we start, we are recording this. We will be recording this, and if you would mute yourself while the presentation is going on, we'd appreciate it. You can put your questions in the chat. So Maureen will have them after her first half hour, which will be her presentation, and then the second half will be for questions. So did I forget anything, Pam? No. I think I said everything. Okay. Now I just want to, yeah, I just want to introduce our speaker now. Our speaker is Representative Maureen Bauer. She is a South Bend native, and she went to public school here in South Bend and to IUPUI. She's worked in the legislature as a staffer before she was elected. And I don't think I'm going to go into all the committees you're on. The one that surprised me was the Agriculture and Rural Development Committee. And what was the other one that was surprising? The Corn Marketing Council. Those were two that kind of surprised me, but you can let us know about the other things that you do. And I'm going to turn it over to you because they're more interested in hearing from you than from me. And welcome.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you all for the invitation. I am a League of Women Voter member, so I'm just happy to join you all and to just answer your questions about what happened this legislative session. You know, I've been reading the news just like you all, and some of that information gets back to us and some of it doesn't. So I've received a lot of emails, phone calls throughout this 110 days that we met down at the State House. And so here I'll be able to kind of give updates of where the legislation ended up. So I am the ranking minority member of Agriculture and Rural Development. It is a pretty bipartisan committee. I do grow grapes. So while I represent a more urban area of the state, my background in grape growing and sustainable agriculture has led me to be the ranking minority member on that committee. I'm also a member of Environmental Affairs, which is one of the more controversial committees, and Judiciary. So I am in my third year of my second term, and we'll just kind of jump right into it and go into some of the overview of this past legislative session. So we alternate between a short session and a long session. This year was a long year where our only constitutional requirement is to pass a 2-year budget. And we had to do that by April 29th. We concluded about 2 days early, about 2:30 in the morning, kind of strategy to wear everyone down and slow down the floor speeches during the budget. But of the 1,154 bills filed, 252 of those were signed into law. There were no vetoes this year by the governor. I think every year since I've been there, there was a controversial bill that the governor did veto, and then the legislature was called back to override the veto. As most of you know, there is a Republican supermajority in both the House and the Senate and a Republican governor. So supermajority, you don't even need the other party to be present to conduct business. Essentially, any of their policy priorities can be passed without any need to gather bipartisan support. But just sharing a little bit about my experience as a legislator, there's probably less than 29% female legislators in the state of Indiana. Of course, my district and many communities across the state are about 51% female. So it's not a true representation of the population among the state. I am under 40. There's a millennial caucus that we're trying to coordinate, both bipartisan members of the House and Senate, to just find issues that we can work on together. We haven't quite formulated that yet, but we're still brainstorming, trying to look at possibly the next, the workforce of the future generation, to see what we can do to encourage people to live, work, and then stay within the state. We do have a power caucus, just to address that question there in the chat. It's a women in government. So it's House, Senate, Republican and Democratic members. And we generally fundraise to help collect donations for a scholarship, which we give out every year. And it's usually for a non-traditional student, perhaps a mother who stopped her education to pursue a family, or some sort of had to take care of a family member who interrupted her educational experience. So we give this scholarship out so she can continue her education. That's always really uplifting and something we do every year. But to kind of jump into what we did this session, when it comes to the budget, that is again our one responsibility. It was a $44 billion biannual budget, so spending about $22 billion a year. There were some good things, of course, there were some bad things, and the votes largely fell along party lines, which is quite common for the budget. We say that the budget reflects our priorities, and so the things that we fund kind of are a reflection of where we are within the House and Senate leadership. One of the highlights was that it eliminated the K-12 textbook fee, which is something that my Democratic caucus has been asking for about 20 years to do. In the House version of the budget, that expense fell on local school corporations. When it came over to the Senate and came back to the House, they did have a line item in the budget to eliminate those textbook fees. So that was a major victory there. Other things in the budget, it did increase state police salaries to $70,000 a year, but also gave salary increases about 43% to the governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and secretary of state. There was increased funding for conservation, public and mental health, but they underfunded that from the governor's initial ask, which was 2/3 public health funding in the final budget. And for mental health, which was a major topic this session, they asked for $130 a year, and they only gave $50 million a year. They asked for $130 million a year. They gave $50 million a year. Of course, that's quite an increase from where we were before, but substantially underfunding what we need to fully respond and react to a lot of these healthcare and mental health crises that we are seeing here in St. Joseph County and across the state. The Dolly Parton Imagination Library was funded to be statewide, but countering that, we also had a bill passed to criminalize with a felony for any school librarian for distributing material deemed harmful, removing the defense of educational material. In the budget, there was a massive private school voucher expansion. It essentially is a universal voucher expansion where any family of four making $220,000 a year is eligible to receive a voucher. That's usually for families who are currently paying for private school. They will now receive state funding to send their child to that school. And we are one of the few states that still does not fund pre-K education. It's still a pilot program. Now, we did expand eligibility to $41,625 a year, but of course that's woefully under compared to what we have expanded for private vouchers at that $220 a year. And so, as I stated, all those bills, or all the bills that were passed out of the House and the Senate were signed by the governor. There were no vetoes. one of the major, maybe I'll share my screen now, if that's okay. I just kind of created this graphic to go over some of the more popular bills that I got calls and emails about that I think were of interest to the community. I will highlight the bills that I passed. It was kind of seemed unique that members of the Democratic minority in the House and Senate got bills passed this year. I got 3 of my authored pieces of legislation passed and signed into law. One of which I'm incredibly proud of, House Bill 1219. It's the 3rd year I filed it. In South Bend, you may have heard me repeat this story, but in 2019, we had 2 firefighters die of a rare brain cancer. At one point in time, they were working at the same fire station. Cancer is the leading cause of line of duty death for firefighters, and we don't have data about their exposure to these toxic forever chemicals that are both in their firefighting foam and in their gear. With this pilot program to test firefighters' blood for elevated levels of PFAS chemicals, will be the first state in the country to know where they stand, if they are being exposed at higher levels or if it's not a concern at all. So I don't know if many of you saw the movie Dark Waters, but it was a lawyer, I think in West Virginia, Robert Billow, and he took on DuPont, who was contaminated. Runoff from the DuPont factory was going into a pond, and these guys' cows were consuming the water and they were dying. It turned out they were contaminated by PFAS, and we're learning more and more about PFAS exposure in everything that's waterproof, fireproof. They've been used since the 1950s. And now we're going to at least look at the workplace exposure that firefighters are facing while on the job and see what we can do to reverse those cancer diagnoses. The next bill that I'd like to highlight is House Bill 1228. HEA is just House Enroll Act once it passed out of both chambers. This is my attempt to protect children and child athletes. If you recall, there was a bill to protect youth sports, which banned any trans girl from competing in girls' sports. I thought we could take a better route to truly protect kids, and found that we have a loophole in our Child Seduction Act where any coach who works for a school or school corporation is held to the standard of our child seduction statute. But if you work for a club or a traveling hockey league or any other sort of youth sport not affiliated with a school, they are not held to this standard. So we closed that up, and now any adult in a position of authority who oversees or supervises a child athlete will be held to this standard of our child seduction statute in the state of Indiana. Another bill, House Enroll Act 1627, expands the Marion County pilot program, which was created last year, that allows nonprofits who have been in their community for 5 years, who have work experience rehabilitating homes, who are approved by the county government to participate in this early tax sale process, to have first bid on properties that go through the tax roll twice and remain on the tax sale. So this bill passed last year, I think had nearly 30 amendments added to it. It's a very well thought out process, but this helps organizations like Habitat for Humanity, community development corporations like Near Northwest Neighborhood Association, other areas or other communities that rehab homes for low to moderate income levels. They would allow them to have that first bid opportunity to get those homes back on the tax roll, rehabilitate them for first-time homeowners to address our shortage of housing stock that we have across the state, and certainly here in St. Joseph County. So as I introduced this bill, it was statewide. It passed out of the House, scaled back to St. Joseph County. And then in the Senate, actually Senator Rogers helped me get it back to statewide. And then we were able to expand this bill and sign it into law to apply to all counties, all 92 counties. And then the last bill I want to highlight, just in regards to what I authored and was signed into law is first of its kind that I can recall, students demand action language being passed into law. This is a tough subject to address because we know it's a problem. We know that children are dying at a higher rate due to firearms and access to them. We want to ensure we're doing everything we possibly can to protect our schools and our children and our teachers. I found this language from Students Demand Action, and it did not get a hearing in the House. The author of a bill allowed me to put this amendment into the Senate, and it would send a letter home to every school parent or guardian saying, if you have a child in the home and you have a gun in the home, this is how you safely store that firearm. So to me, it's just a public education campaign. We have billboards about fire safety, how you prevent a forest fire. We have, you don't touch a downed power line, don't, safety around electricity. We have to start educating about how you store your gun in your home. We've not been able to pass a safe storage law in the state of Indiana, but this had bipartisan support and is now going to become law and help raise some public awareness. I will say that this amendment went into a bill. I think there was a question about it, but I don't know if I can see it from here. It went into a bill that provides state-funded firearm training for teachers, which is a little controversial. But I'm in my third year as a state legislator, and I didn't know that in 2013 we passed a law saying that teachers can have firearms in the classroom. So for the past 10 years, that's been law in the state of Indiana. I don't think we have it here. They could not name what school corporations around the state allow teachers to carry a firearm in the classroom. But the bill that this language was amended into provides training for anyone who does bring a firearm into the classroom. So as it appears, current law, you can carry a gun in the classroom, but there's no requirement for training. So now there will be some training. If someone wants to carry a firearm, they can be trained. It does have some funding given to the school corporation. If there is a school shooting, it'll help with counseling for both the children, students, and the educators. Everytown for Gun Safety and the Teachers Associations did not oppose that bill language because of the funding attached to it. It's not a mandate, it's a voluntary training program. So I think initially the bill always should have had training, although many of us oppose the idea of arming teachers in the first place. I'm kind of just going over some of the priority legislation. That these are bills that I got a lot of calls and emails about. I discussed PFAS biomonitoring program did receive a line item in the budget, which is a great success. So we can at least get that program started. The tests are about $300. It's not a test that every doctor does. It's not a test that a doctor can interpret. So we have a long road to go to getting that program up and running and the tests through and interpreting those results. Another bill that a lot of us in St. Joseph County have been promoting and talking about is renewing and enhancing the South Bend Professional Sports and Convention Development Area. So that was originally created 20 years ago. It is available to any community that has a professional sports team. So Fort Wayne has one, we do, others like Fishers. Initially, the collected tax revenue within the county that we could keep was $2 million. We were able to expand that to $5 million, and 2.5 of that goes to the South Bend Cubs Stadium for their planned improvements to maybe become a AAA one day, which would be great. We could get some more Chicago Cubs players here to train and all that sort of thing. It just really is about economic development, about tourism and overall hospitality, creating a sense of place. We've already had about 60 low-income housing projects approved, direct result with this PSCDA development as well. So it really does kind of create this community and benefits our area. Senate Bill 1 was one that a lot of people advocated for, especially Faith in Indiana. Many of you might be members and came down to the State House to meet with elected officials about this. So any bill that is like 1 through 4 is the priority bill for that caucus. So it would be the Republican caucus priority bill. This was one of the first years where we prioritized mental health that I can recall. I think everyone is talking and concerned about the mental health, that we are investing in crisis response, that we have facilities that can care for individuals, and even the police community and our sheriff's office know that they are not well equipped for handling these calls. And so we do have the 988 crisis hotline, which I encourage you all to share with your friends and your family. There is someone to call. We also are trying to create a place to go and really fully address the response that we have to mental health crises. Now, as I mentioned in the budget, they asked for $130 million a year, and they got $50 million a year. It's still an increase from where we were. It wasn't quite enough for me to vote for the budget, but we are progressing, and hopefully we can get another 50 million when we come back to the budget the next time. House Bill 1091 is a bill I filed last year. And on the topic of women in the legislature, and there are very few of us, we also have incredibly high infant and maternal mortality rates in the state of Indiana. And I do believe that's a direct result of not having a lot of women in office. I will say we got 2 more under 40 or 40-ish women legislators with children under 18. And I think there's only 3 or 4 moms in office with kids under 18 in the state of Indiana. But I stay focused on maternal mortality and maternal health. And Neighbor to Neighbor is an organization here in St. Joseph County in South Bend who helps welcome immigrants and refugees into our community. And they brought this issue forward to me where we were one of the few states that did not waive the 5-year Medicaid or CHIP program for legally residing immigrant children and pregnant women. After I filed that bill, which didn't get a hearing that summer, the Commission on Improving the Well-Being of Children recommended that this become law, and they found a Republican senator to author the bill this year. I was happy to be a House sponsor. Once the bill came over to the House, it did not get a hearing. So working with my colleagues in both the House and the Senate, we amended this into a state agency bill and got it passed. So instead of waiting 5 years to go see a doctor, if you come here and you're pregnant, you are going to inevitably seek health care, and you're often going to the emergency room. So this will be cost savings for the state. This will be life-saving for maternal health and infant health. Continue to encourage healthy babies, healthy pregnancies, and getting those checkups. After the special session, there was a rare bipartisan support to expand access to birth control. I think at the national level, they will soon allow everyone to have access to birth control at the pharmacy level. But we did pass this year at the state level. You do receive a health screening, blood pressure check, and pharmacists, I believe, can choose not to participate. But this is definitely a step forward, especially in rural areas where they don't have as many physicians, and it can take a long time to get seen. I mentioned that we removed the textbook fee, which was a major win. And property taxes, those bills came in while we were in session. We only really had one bill to address this at the state level, and that's 1499. And it does raise the income eligibility for senior property tax deductions. It also increases the phase out of the tax increase. So there's a lot more we can do. And I've gotten a lot of calls and emails about seniors who are worried about staying in their home, and that's certainly a priority, and we'll have to continue to look at that next session. There's a few more. These are bills. A lot of these bills were authored by my colleagues in the House Democratic Caucus. Like I said, about 13 bills or so were passed, which isn't a lot, but it was quite an accomplishment and a reflection of our hard work. Carolyn Jackson passed a bill to require schools to test their water for lead, but it omitted preschools. And so she had filed this bill previous years, and this year they did add in preschools to test their drinking water for lead and take action when necessary. House Bill 1367 was authored by Representative Gore in Indianapolis, and he works in the sheriff's office. And this would prohibit conversion devices added to a firearm where you can fire off multiple rounds. You basically convert it to a machine gun. They have been taking these off the streets, and they're illegal at the federal level. At the state level, it must be attached to the firearm to be considered illegal. So now we fix that, again, kind of a loophole there, and will continue to help us make our communities safer and protect the police force who are responding to these scenes and allow prosecutors to file charges here. House Bill 1321 was authored by freshman legislator Victoria Garcia Wilburn. Her husband used to be a police officer, and they know firsthand about the cumulative trauma that first responders face. Just off the talking about increasing gun violence, just imagine our first responders are the first ones on the scene to see that person, to respond to those situations. And those are things you just don't forget when you close your eyes at night and try to find your sleep. You know, we have to start doing more for our first responders to encourage them to get involved in recruit and retain our talent here. We've just increased our police force here in South Bend, and we need to continue to make sure we're doing that and taking care of them. So it provides training to identify suicide, ideation and prevention, and provides some more mental health support. Senate Bill 4 was a priority of Dr. Box, who just announced she's retiring from the state health department, but it does send additional funding to local health departments to address our public health. We do not invest in public health compared to the other states. We have a long way to go to make sure we have healthier communities and healthier individuals. And the only caveat in this bill is that the local government can turn away the money. And in St. Joseph County, I am worried that we might be one of those counties that refuses to accept those dollars. 1006 was hard work of Representative Steuerwald, who's in leadership in the Republican House caucus, and again addresses providing treatment instead of jail cell for those facing mental health crises. And then these two bills, as a ranking minority member of Agriculture and Rural Development, we had a bill to ban local bans on selling puppies in pet stores. So St. Joseph County is one of the few counties that doesn't allow puppies to be sold in the pet store. I remember as a kid in the mall, there were puppies there. And we decided at the local level that we didn't want to support those types of practices. You can sell other items, just not puppies. So there was a bill filed in the Senate and in the House, which would have superseded any local ordinance that banned the retail sale of puppies in stores. It was largely pushed by Uncle Bill's and Petland, who have lobbyists going in states all across the nation and are petitioning to override these, preempt these local ordinances. It got pretty far. It passed out of the Senate. We defeated it in the House Ag and Rural Development Committee. There were some whisperings it was going to come back in that time period of the last portion of session, conference committee time, where dead bills can come back to life. And I believe this summer we'll have a summer study committee where we look at best practices. If we elevate the standards of breeding puppies, I think that would be great. But I have a very big problem when we try to override local government's ability to pass ordinances that best suit their community, which the state government tends to do quite often. And then Senate Bill 414, as it came over to the House, there was a pretty dramatic Environmental Affairs Committee where an amendment was added in, which would have wiped away the protections for our remaining wetlands. As you might remember, in 2021, we redefined wetlands and stripped away many protections for class 1 and 2. This would have removed protections for class 3, which are the most rare. You cannot build on them. They have wildlife and habitat. It was really frustrating, the process in general. It's a very controversial topic. It was added in committee without any debate other than Indiana home builders coming in and testifying in favor. The Senate said that language was not germane when we sent the bill back to them, and they took it out. But that's something that anyone who is interested in protecting our wetlands or our natural environment and concerned about future flooding and climate change to keep your eye out for. And then I call these the bad. These are controversial. So so talk about the voucher expansion. So we're putting about $1 billion towards private education, where we could certainly fund and adequately fund our public school system. So that's something that we continue to express frustration about. We should be treating all of our schools at the same level, holding them accountable to issues like bullying, who you accept, special education, teaching, and all of that. I mentioned also that House Bill 1447 does open up school teachers and librarians to criminal penalties. Now, the one caveat about this bill is you must be a parent within the school corporation to file a complaint. So it does prevent, these organizations from going around county by county, state by across the state, and requesting books to be removed from school libraries. It does still have that felony penalty, which is incredibly concerning to me. Gas tax is something that we've kind of kept our eye on in the budget. It expands the gas tax increase for another 3 years. And we had a $4 billion budget surplus. So it's hard for me to understand why we need to collect more taxes when many families are struggling with inflation and cost of living every day. I know League of Women Voters works on a lot of voting rights and advocates for legislation to expand voting rights. House Bill 1334 limits absentee ballots. So you can no longer request a ballot for someone else. And this does apply to senior homes. It has to be someone who's a family member of that individual requesting a ballot. So it's my fear that we might disenfranchise more voters, especially senior voters. You can no longer mail a ballot application, which some people did after the pandemic, in effort to increase involvement in our voting process. So we're kind of restricting more and more absentee ballot opportunities there in the state of Indiana. I also mentioned that Senate Bill 1 that many in the community advocated for was underfunded. They asked for $160 million and they got $50 million. And Senate Bill 486, which was authored by Senator Rogers and barely passed, brought tons of teachers to the State House, removes what a teacher can bargain for. So, I mean, my parents were both public school teachers. I say it was a time when we respected teachers, where we paid them, where we trusted them to do their job and didn't have to put all these restrictions on them as legislators. And we're continuing to drive teachers out of the state, out of the profession. And this is another example of that. And I was really, I felt the frustration of many when this passed, especially people who were in the hallway and, advocating for this to be defeated. And then House Bill 1008 is kind of buying into this national rhetoric of ESG investments, which defines companies as woke. So we will now not be able to, we will not be allowing investment firms to invest public pensions into any company with social or environmental principles. The original fiscal on this bill was, I think, in the billions of dollars, which would cost to the state. They rolled it back quite a bit, and we don't have an updated fiscal. We don't know what the impact will be, but we're playing with the pensions of, those first responders I talked about, the line of duty death benefit, and then legislators aren't impacted by this. Our pensions aren't. So it's really, again, frustrating when we see some of these social issues come to the forefront in the state of Indiana, especially when we were guaranteed that we weren't going to get into any of these divisive issues this session. this is a lot more that was in the budget that I think I mentioned. I will say another, the last three I'll discuss. So with the closure of Portage Manor, we learned that RCAP funding, which gives state dollars to county homes like Portage Manor, has not been increased in years. So we attempted to get that increase this year. We started working on this in February, so it's past the time of filing a bill. We've been working with FSSA to try to get their support for this. And while we didn't get it passed this year, it's something we'll certainly look at in the future to maintain individuals staying in homes like Portage Manor, and that they could stay here in St. Joseph County and not move away from families. The driving cards for undocumented immigrants was another issue where we had people at the State House, Notre Dame public or policy students and St. Adalbert's and other church organizations been advocating for this. Many other states allow driving cards for undocumented immigrants. It passed out of a Senate committee for the first time ever, but was killed in Senate appropriations. So got further than it ever has, but still we have not moved that forward. But I know for sure we'll be trying next year. Senator Dorio and a lot of the Elkhart County delegation has been working on this as well. They recognize the importance to their community and the economy, and the farming community, you know, recognizes these individuals as part of our community. And so this is important for them to get to work, to take their kids to school, and just keep our roads safer from a public safety perspective when you can reduce hit and run accidents and that sort of thing. And then marijuana is an issue that comes up a lot, just being an island surrounded by counties. Even Kentucky has passed some sort of legalization. Again, for the first time ever, we heard a bill in House Courts and Criminal Code that would have decriminalized 2 ounces of less of marijuana. It was just a hearing only, no vote, but we're actually hearing this bill and actually discussing it for the first time ever. So that's something to look forward to next year. And then these are bills that I just feel, this is my personal opinion, are a bit hateful. I voted against both of them because, again, we're being dragged into this narrative of national culture wars. Attacks on the trans community is just unfortunate that we are seeing this happen in the state of Indiana. It's my belief I will personally never vote for a bill that will legislate hate into our code. House Enrolled Act 1608 is our version of Florida's Don't Say Gay law. One of our colleagues called it the Don't Say They law. So any child who goes to their teacher and requests a name change or a pronoun change, that teacher must notify the parent within 5 days of a request for a name or title change. So we are assuming that every child is living in a supportive home, that they have parents that they can trust. And if the parent doesn't know and they're going to the teacher, then maybe that might not be the case. And so just from hearing experiences of, you know, growing up in other communities, I know there are plenty of parents who just do not welcome a child transitioning or don't respect them to even have this kind of change of heart. So I think it's very concerning when we're expecting a child to know the law, that within 5 days, that teacher has to essentially out their child to their parent. And then the final one, Senate Enroll Act 480, bans essential medical care for trans youth. Currently, there are 1,000 children seeking care at Riley Hospital. This is a decision made between the doctor, the patient as the child, and their parent or guardian. And legislators are kind of sticking their nose in another medical decision here, risking the well-being of those 1,000 children who are seeking that care, putting at risk their mental health, their physical health. ACLU has filed suit on that last bill there, and we'll await to see what happens. But with that, I will stop and answer any of these questions that have been put in the chat.
Thank you so much. Do you want to take a look at the chat with me and see there are a lot of, let's see, where am I? Here we are. There are a lot of questions and I don't know even where to start.
Should we go back?
Let's see.
So the hand, training bill I mentioned. So again, that for the past 10 years, teachers have been able to carry a gun in the classroom. They can't tell us which school corporations do. It does provide funds to train, funds for the crisis response if there's a school shooting. It's not mandatory. Let's see. I don't know if I can.
Go ahead. The amount given to our area for PSCDA consistent with the amount given to other areas with professional sports teams?
Yes, so we match the 5 million matches what Fort Wayne currently has. So we were lower than Fort Wayne, and then our bill originally was just for South Bend, and Fishers joined in. So now South Bend, Fishers, and Fort Wayne will all have that 5 million that we can collect locally before those tax dollars go down to the state.
What about HEA 1091? It's a pro-life bill that saves lives, and HEA 1568 will reduce unwanted pregnancies and terminations. Did self-identified pro-life members who supported the abortion ban frame these as pro-life issues and use that language when explaining their support?
Maybe more so when it came to the prescribing birth control at pharmacies. That issue came up during the special session where we passed an abortion ban. Representative Nagel in the House Republican caucus asked a lot of testifiers who claimed that they had an unwanted pregnancy that they made the decision to keep the baby. And she asked them many times over and over, why did you not know about birth control? Did you not take birth control? So we knew that we were building the case for helping expand birth control access, educate individuals how you prevent an unwanted pregnancy. So I think that was a result of some of the conversations during that special session. 1091 was not, we did not get into the debate about that. Of course, I knew that's what we were doing, is helping identify some gaps in our healthcare system. But we got it passed, and it was introduced by a Republican in the Senate, and both those passed, I believe, unanimously. Well, 1568 had some no votes, unfortunately.
This is a comment about 2 to 3 school districts allowing teachers to be armed. One is Jay County, but not sure about the others. Do you have a comment on that?
No, and I didn't know what they were. I imagine they would be in rural areas. That's helpful information.
SEA 4 increases state funding for local health departments. Are you concerned that counties like St. Joe might reject the funding?
Yes, I am. We had a county council member testifying committee, both in the House and the Senate, opposing the funding due to the governor's mask mandates and closures during the pandemic. I mean, it was a horrible time, right? The pandemic was hopefully once in our lifetime, hopefully once 100 years. But I feel fortunate that I survived and my family members survived. It's not the case for everybody, but it revealed gaps in our healthcare system. And we have a responsibility to serve and protect our communities, and that includes creating healthy environments and healthy people. So I hope we accept this funding, but I know it's going to be difficult, and hopefully we can advocate for that together.
There are a couple of things here on puppies.
Yeah.
You can still buy them at the UP Mall, can't you?
I don't think so. St. Joseph County does have a ban on the sale of puppies in pet stores.
Okay.
I can look into that. The puppy
Here's
mill.
another one that says, thank you for understanding the importance of wetlands. That is a league issue of, high on our agenda. Then on the voting changes there's an opinion that how it will be implemented statewide on absentee voting.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, is how do you enforce a lot of those voting suppression methods? It's often, seniors and minorities who are targeted when we put in these voting suppression languages. Like, there is no answer for how it's going to be enforced, but now it is law. and we will wait to see what that does. We already have high rate of voter apathy in the state of Indiana. We know that our turnout is incredibly low. We should encourage everyone right to vote. And this does just the opposite.
Mhm. The next one is, what justification do legislators offer supporting devolution by demanding state rights freedom from federal laws that overrule the state's ability to make their own laws, at the same time overriding the local government's ability to make their own laws policy, like plastic bag bans and so forth? Local governments aren't constitutionally protected, but what other justification do they offer?
I can't explain that. I really wish I could. It leaves us scratching our heads quite often. You know, it applies to you except when it doesn't. We passed in the late hours of few remaining days of session, we passed language that does not allow Marion County to implement any no turn on red rule. And it's just kind of this attack on local control. And those are put into place in school zones or blind intersections, and they are designed to keep you safe and pedestrian safe. And we've seen an increase in pedestrian accidents and fatalities, and they're only on the rise. So there's been some talk where maybe the city continues to put up those ordinances, and how is it enforced? Is there a criminal penalty? We've seen in Northwest Indiana in Hammond where the mayor took on NRA by, there was a restriction from passing a more stringent firearm law, and he just ignored it. So we're put into these situations where the state and local governments are competing for power. And it's exactly what the state government doesn't want from the federal government. And I think it's just a result of the supermajority. There are many members who've never worked in a minority, have only worked in a supermajority legislature. And so you just don't have that debate. You don't have that compromise. And I think that's what kind of makes efficient government. So I can't really explain the justification, but it's frustrating.
The next is a comment about HEA 1417 as horrific. Liberals, conservatives, and libertarians should all oppose this law. The book at the center of the debate is recommended reading for all Quaker youth. Will the Bible be banned? There's a lot of violence, incest, rape, etc. in that book. Who would want to be a school librarian in this context?
Yeah, I don't know if you saw the photo in Fishers where they took down like all of the teen lit section. All the shelves are bare. And it is concerning. The only caveat in this is it does narrow it down to, it creates a process for removing a book. So the original bill, Senate Bill 12, was worse than what we ended up with, but it's still the underlying bill. Its language itself is going to do more harm. We all agree that pornography should not be in any school, any library. The trouble is it doesn't just say pornography, it says harmful materials, and that's open for interpretation and can be used for anyone who just disagrees with the content. And we've seen examples of that. So, my grandmother worked at a library. She stocked the shelves. She had 4 children and was a single mother. So would she face a felony? Who is held accountable? Do they go after the person who purchased the book, the person who stocked the shelf? It's all incredibly vague. It's not good legislation. And generally that I don't support legislation written like that. And on the House floor, a member did ask about the Bible to challenge that thinking. But again, is not really open to a lot of debate when they pass things through that quickly. There was Senate Bill 12 got a hearing in the House Education Committee. There was a lot of people who came in to testify, and that bill did not move out of House Education. And it came again in the last few days of that conference committee's time where people amend those dead language those bills into other bills to try to keep them alive. So again, the process was frustrating. And then here we are getting this passed. So it'll be something to watch and see how it's enforced, and possibly amend it and reverse the harm it could do going forward.
There are a couple of comments here about the budget. First of all, what is the budget surplus from the current budget? And later, why does Indiana maintain such a high budget surplus?
So it's recommended that you keep 10% of the budget in reserves for a recession. We have more than that. During the legislative session, we get a preview, and we found 1.5 billion additional dollars in reserves. So that was more money that we thought we could invest in our communities. But again, from the governor's recommendations on mental health, public health, we underfunded them. So I believe we are still at about $2 billion surplus, if not more. Definitely, I think we are over that 10%. And I can't quite explain why they keep that much in reserves. They have a AAA bond rating, but we don't bond for projects. And then, as I mentioned, we're increasing the gas tax. So we're going to collect more dollars. The solution is often to cut taxes to increase investment. But we have workers leaving the state. We have decreased population in the state of Indiana. So again, we have to reevaluate our priorities and what we're willing to support in the budget as well.
So there's a question here. Did you say, thank you for that. Did you say that Senator Rogers introduced Bill 486?
Yep, she introduced it in the Senate, and then the House sponsor worked with Representative Teshka. So both
okay. There are many thank yous here. One of them describing you as a rock star, which I think is interesting. Congratulations. How can the supermajority drive to impoverish public schools be stopped?
Yeah, I mean, that's a philosophical debate, honestly, is the difference between the two parties. We passed vouchers in, I think that was also in 2013. No, in 2007-ish. So they've been around for a while. It's just kind of a philosophical debate between legislative parties where we believe we should invest in our public schools. It is our constitutional duty to provide a free education. There's some debate whether it has to be quality education, which I think is incredibly frustrating. And so we continue to drain these pots, the funding to these different buckets. We result in schools having to close because not only are we dividing the funding, but we're dividing the students. And the Indiana Republicans who are in power believe that the money should follow the child. So money doesn't go to the school, it goes to the child. So if you open up a new charter school, you're pulling students away from that school, and that goes the money as well. So then we have to have those difficult decisions at the local level where we cannot keep a building open if it's less than 60% occupancy. And there was a bill to allow schools to be sold for $1 to a charter school if they are not being used for 60% occupancy for teaching. That language disappeared, but still you can see kind of where the mindset is when you have bills filed like that, where we should be encouraging schools operating at full capacity, fully funded, encourage teachers to remain within the public school system instead of creating this competition, which only pulls away those resources from our public schools.
Another question, is it true that the legislature can override a veto with only a majority vote?
Yes, but the balance of the legislature is 70-30 in the House and 40-10 in the Senate. So that's where you get the supermajority, and they have far more than a simple majority.
Okay. Has it been brought up that having more schools also dilutes the pool of teachers? Having more schools. Oh yeah, I'm assuming they're talking about charter schools.
Yeah, and I think we see that we are one of the few areas that has those zone systems in place. And I believe there was discussion about changing the bargaining rights there. They do get increased pay there. So, I mean, we are competing, we are pulling teachers from traditional public schools to work in these new types of schools. I mean, it's incredibly controversial. There's not as much reporting. One bill I forgot to mention, which was Vernon Smith's bill on bullying, got passed. And that's one thing that I heard a lot from, and a lot of younger students talk about their experience being bullied in school. And, you know, a lot of these schools that get public money do not have to play by the same rules as traditional schools in terms of reporting. And that does include bullying. And so I heard a lot of stories. There's a Elkhart parent coalition who I spoke with, advocating after a young girl took her own life after just being incredibly pushed to the final limits from bullying. But this will create some reporting requirements to address that, to prevent some of those worst case scenarios. But I don't think it applies to charters, and it certainly doesn't apply to private voucher schools.
Okay, I think there are some more comments here. Many thank yous. Is there anything else that you want to add, Maureen, in the last couple of minutes here?
I just hope that was helpful. I think covered most of the things I had hoped. Hope it was a little bit interesting. I mean, I will say most of the bills are bipartisan. I did mention that we had some sort of an understanding that after the special session, we weren't going to tackle those divisive social issues. We saw that that wasn't the case. It is frustrating to me, it's frustrating to you and other members in the community who want to see their elected officials focusing on real issues like, you know, property tax increases, protecting our natural resources, supporting our teachers and our public school systems, addressing high cost of medical care. I did forget to mention some of the healthcare bills that were mentioned. Part of that 1003, 1004, those priority bills of the House Republican caucus were to address medical costs, especially in hospitals. I received a lot of messages from Beacon here in town that weren't satisfied with the language as it was filed, that would have caused them to close down some of their facilities like Epworth, who are now going to be opening up this crisis response facility. So we really heard their concerns and were able to kind of backpedal on that a little bit. When we talk about high cost of healthcare, it's not just hospitals. Certainly there is some room for improvement, but we have to look at insurance, we have to look at private practices in the whole picture. But these bills were filed just to go after nonprofit hospitals in the state, and it was specifically targeting them. So Senate Bill 7 bans non-compete clauses for physicians. Initially, that bill would have banned all non-competes. They narrowed it down just for physicians to try to encourage more private practices, to keep practitioners in the state. Many of these non-competes cause them to leave town or leave the state. We will be creating a review process for Medicaid reimbursement rate. We know that that's incredibly low, where a lot of hospitals are losing money. And so hopefully this summer we'll take a look at that and provide some real change going forward. But, you know, we have an incredibly remarkable trauma care center here in South Bend, where a lot of people from Chicago come to South Bend to use our services. So that's something I'm looking forward to looking at next session, looking at the gun violence issue that not only South Bend, St. Joseph County, but we're seeing nationwide. how we can, again, invest in our communities, create better trauma response and trauma care systems, and slowly try to address these real issues that we're facing in our state.
Okay, we've totally chock full this time here. Thank you so much, Representative Bauer, for coming and talking to us and answering all these questions. And it was very, very informative, and we really appreciate your participation here today. Thank you so much. One other thing, just join us again next month. That we will be meeting on the second Friday in June. And so please join us. The topic is to be announced. So thank you and have a wonderful afternoon. And thanks again, Representative Bauer.
Thank you. Thank you very much.